Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter, globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, The Vanishing at Vienne Gallery. The late afternoon sun, gentle yet insistent, cast elongated shafts of gold across the polished parquet of the Vienne Gallery. The air inside was already charged with anticipation. Aides fussed with draperies, an assistant arranged tall vases of scarlet roses beside each gilt frame, and a hush of excitement rippled among the select few gathered for this evening's private unveiling. The gallery's owner, Madame Lucille Vienne, paced behind the reception desk, her black dress, cut in the elegant fashion of continental mourning, rustling softly as she checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes. Hercule Poirot, impeccably turned out in a crisp grey morning coat, silk waistcoat of dove grey, and a tie patterned in the tiny Belgian colours, alighted from the handsome cab with all the poise of a man for whom disruption was but a temporary inconvenience. He gave the cabman a small gratuity, cupped his moustaches with both gloved hands, and allowed his dark eyes, curiously bright beneath perfectly arched brows, to sweep the façade of the Vienne Gallery. A steady stream of guests, art patrons, society matrons, and a scattering of London's artistic avant-garde, made their way through the ornately carved entrance. At the threshold, he was greeted by the gallery's manager, Felix Rawlinson, a man whose eager smile seemed practiced to the point of brittleness. "Monsieur Poirot, I am so grateful you could join us on such short notice." Rawlinson inclined his head and gestured to a small vestibule to receive the famous detective out of the public gaze. "Madame Vienne will explain, I'm sure, but I confess we are in something of a quandary." Poirot's moustaches twitched with mild curiosity. "Madame Vienne sent word of urgency," he said in his light French accent, "but what sort of quandary?" Rawlinson's smile faltered just a quarter of an inch. "It appears that our star artist, the brilliant Miss Imogen Thorne, has, well, vanished. And with her has gone the masterpiece she was due to unveil this very evening." "Vanished?" Poirot repeated, his small grey cells already clicking into gear. He stepped forward, passing behind the reception desk and into the main gallery space. Here, gilt frames of various sizes lined the cream-painted walls, each currently shrouded with fine muslin cloth. An imposing sculpture of a stylized firebird, carved from rosewood and lacquered in fiery reds and oranges, stood on a pedestal beneath a broad skylight. Now, though, that statue looked lonely, as if the gallery had been drained of all life and purpose. "What you see here," Rawlinson explained, "is the setting for Miss Thorne's debut of The Crimson Fox. A painting rumored to be her magnum opus. Angelic critics and society journalists alike were prepared to hail it. We waited until precisely 6 o'clock to announce her appearance. At 5:57, she was here. At 5:59, nothing. No sign of her, and no sign of the canvas." Poirot's eyes darted from the still-shrouded frames to the broad, arched window at the far end of the room. He noted the reflections of lamps yet to be lit, and the perfect gleam of the polished oak floorboards. His gaze alighted upon a single object out of place, a slender glove of pale grey kid leather, lying as if discarded on the threshold of the sculpted firebird's pedestal. "May I?" Poirot asked softly, extending a gloved hand. Rawlinson nodded, abashed, and Poirot bent to pick up the glove with gentle reverence. He inspected it at arm's length, turning it over before jabbing a gloved finger at one tiny smudge of soot near the cuff. "Size small," he mused, "undoubtedly the artist's own. And note the faint perfume residue, orange blossom, overlaid with a darker, musk-like scent." Rawlinson's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Miss Thorne favors that exact combination," he admitted. "Though this, soot, why, you see, the fireplace has not been used in days." Poirot nodded. He pocketed the glove in a small velvet-lined case he carried at his waist, then rose to survey the remainder of the room. "The window," he murmured, stepping toward the tall mullioned panes. "Was it secured when you last saw Miss Thorne here?" "I cannot say for certain," Rawlinson conceded. "I believe one of the attendants closed it after the cleaning staff left this morning." He hesitated. "But it would be difficult for any ordinary person to climb in, or out, through that high opening. The iron grill outside is nearly at shoulder height." The detective crouched to examine the floor beneath. Yet here are traces of damp earth upon the oak. And footprints, irregular in shape, as though the intruder, or the victim, paused or stumbled." He gestured to 5 distinct prints leading away from the base of the pedestal, trailing toward the small door marked to staff only. Rawlinson paled. "The servants' quarters, you know. I ordered them locked. No one should have had cause to be back there this evening." "Indeed," Poirot replied simply, then rose and crossed the room toward a blank wall whose muslin cover still hung untouched. "And here, I presume, stood the painting." He indicated the central frame, its outline visible through the fine covering. "Precisely." Rawlinson spoke with forced calm. "The cloth was to have been lifted at exactly 6. But, you see." Poirot examined the wall for any sign of disturbance. "No telltale warp in the canvas?" he inquired. "No sagging of the tacks that might suggest the work was removed clandestinely?" "I had the best framers affix it only yesterday." "They would have heard nothing if it was taken," Rawlinson insisted. Poirot nodded, still studying the wall, then turned towards the closed staff door. He lifted a neatly gloved finger as though conducting an orchestra. "The question, mon ami, is this: did Miss Thorne vanish of her own volition, perhaps coerced to surrender her masterpiece, or was she assisted, even abducted, by someone she did not suspect? And if so, that someone is almost certainly still within this building." Rawlinson's shoulders slumped. "Inspector Japp is due any moment," he said. "But with all respect, Monsieur Poirot, the police will require more than a few impressions on the floor and a stolen glove to find either Miss Thorne or her painting." Poirot allowed himself a gracious smile. "Patience, my friend. The little grey cells must be fed, first with facts, then with order and method. You will assist me by assembling everyone who was present this afternoon, the staff, the artists, the patrons. And do not touch a single thing in this room until I have had time to speak with each." He paused, glancing toward the skylight, where the last rays of sun lingered defiantly. "I trust you will telegraph for me the exact schedule of this gallery's comings and goings over the previous 48 hours. Rawlinson bowed. "Of course." As Rawlinson scurried away, Poirot stood alone in the hushed grandeur of the gallery. He closed his eyes momentarily, inhaling the still air, perfumery of rosewood polish, lingering orange blossom, a hint of damp soil brought in on uncertain footsteps. Imogen Thorne peered down from the blank frame in spirit, her lost canvas hidden somewhere beyond sight. Poirot's moustaches twitched with the thrill of the chase. "Yes," he murmured to himself, "it is a matter of disappearance most curious, and a puzzle most diverting." He opened his eyes, resolute. With meticulous precision, he would unravel this mystery, turn over every stone, real and figurative, and restore both artist and artwork to the world. But first, he must gather the threads: a glove, a window, a handful of footprints, and a gallery filled with strangers, each harboring some secret. And in the depths of these shadows, the truth awaited its moment in the light. Chapter 2: Portraits and Paradoxes. The next morning broke over London with a pallid sky and a keen breeze that rattled the leaded panes of the Vienne Gallery. Inside, Poirot's little sitting room had been set aside for interviewing those whose hands or hearts might hold the missing painter, or her stolen canvas. A neat row of chairs faced a small table on which stood a silver tray bearing teacups, a steaming pot of Darjeeling, and a plate of thinly sliced lemon cakes. Throughout the room, the chiaroscuro of early light and gilt mirrors lent an air both formal and faintly theatrical, as if the stage were being set for a drama yet unseen. Hercule Poirot, seated in his favorite high-backed chair, tapped one fingertip rhythmically on the armrest. His waxed moustaches quivered with anticipation. "Order, method, and psychology," he murmured. "Mais oui, it is time to inspect each portrait of motive." The first to be summoned was Edward Crispin, a young man of slender build and intense, dark eyes. He arrived in a charcoal suit that hung awkwardly on his narrow shoulders, his expressive hands twisting a faded handkerchief. Crispin was Imogen Thorne's rival at the Royal Academy. Rumor held that his own work had suffered in comparison to her meteoric rise, and that jealousy had spurred him toward desperate acts. Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Crispin, thank you for joining me. Pray, describe your activities yesterday from dawn until, let us say, 6 in the evening." Crispin swallowed. He recounted a morning spent in his studio in Bloomsbury, attempting to capture the restless energy of London's streets. "I was painting until mid-afternoon," he said earnestly, "and then I dined with Professor Caldwell at the Ivy. She offered to show me a draft of a critique she intends to publish. After that, I came here for the unveiling." "Alone?" Poirot pressed. "Alone. Those were my only outings." Crispin's voice wavered. "I wish I could say more to help." "Of course." Poirot's dark eyes were gentle. "And your relation with Miss Thorne?" Crispin's face darkened. "Competitive. She was talented, far more so than I. I envied her success. But envy, Monsieur Poirot, is hardly a motive for crime. I would never harm her, though I confess I have dreamed of surpassing her." Poirot allowed a small smile. Envy is a common companion of the artist. Yet it rarely lunges into violence. He made a note in his little notebook: "No physical evidence ties Crispin to the gallery last night." Poirot would revisit this later. Next came Professor Harriet Caldwell, distinguished academic in her 50s, whose silver hair was swept into a severe knot. She wore tortoiseshell spectacles that lent her a hawk-like air. Caldwell had been Imogen's mentor at the Slade School of Art, guiding her through the rough drafts of early canvases, and now claimed to share a deep friendship with her prodigious pupil. "Professor," began Poirot, as he poured her a cup of tea and placed a lemon cake before her, "you advised Miss Thorne on her technique. Did she confide in you regarding any troubles, financial, personal, or otherwise, prior to yesterday's event?" Caldwell sipped her tea with delicate precision. Imogen was troubled about a commission. She received an offer from a private collector, anonymously generous, yet shadowy in its origins. She worried that acceptance might compromise her artistic integrity. "And this commission," said Poirot, "would have been in addition to the gallery showing." "Yes. A sum large enough to change her life." Yet she doubted the collector's motives. Caldwell set down her cup. She spoke of a mysterious benefactor, identified only as M.L. I never learned more. She guarded that name jealously. Poirot tapped his pen. "And where were you between 4 and 6 yesterday?" "At lunch with Monsieur Crispin, as he mentioned. After that, I returned to my flat in Kensington, drafted my critique, and then received a telegram from Madame Vienne requesting my presence here at 5:45. I arrived precisely at 5:50. "And you did not see Imogen?" "No. I came to witness her presentation and found chaos instead." Poirot studied her keenly. You cared for her greatly. I did. Caldwell's eyes shone. She was like a daughter. She hesitated. I would not betray her trust, even now. Poirot made a note. Professor Caldwell, intimate knowledge, possible emotional motive, no sign of forced departure. The final interview was with Felix Rawlinson, gallery manager, whom Poirot met in the gallery's boardroom. Rawlinson's dark hair was slicked back, his posture rigid as a military officer's. He boasted an easy confidence, until Poirot mentioned the glove. Monsieur Rawlinson, said Poirot, placing the small velvet case on the table, you informed me that this glove belongs to Miss Thorne, yet bears flecks of soot. Explain. Rawlinson's lips pressed thin. I do not know how soot appeared on it. The fireplace in the private salon has not been lit in weeks. Then how? Poirot let the question hang. Rawlinson cleared his throat. I confess I lit a small fire briefly yesterday afternoon to dry some damp certificates. His voice wavered as he admitted this without invitation. I burned out-of-date invoices. I thought nothing of it. And you? Poirot inquired, pivoting to Rawlinson's whereabouts. Where were you between 5 and 6 yesterday? I was organizing the seating in the back gallery and checking the lighting. He proffered spotless gloves. My shoes were cleaned this morning. I did not venture near the staff door. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Yet muddy footprints led precisely through the servants' passage. Rawlinson's composure cracked. I cannot explain that. He pushed his chair back. All I know is that when I met Madame Vienne's telegram, I rushed here to assist. I swear I have done nothing wrong. Poirot inclined his head, inscrutable. Rawlinson, apparent access, possible cover-up, emotional overinvestment in the gallery's fortunes. Having spoken with all three, Poirot returned to the main exhibition hall. The muslin covering still hid every painting, and the Firebird sculpture remained under guard. He stood in the center of the room, feet planted precisely, mustaches quivering. He reviewed each clue. The glove, soot-stained, size small, perfumed. Muddy footprints, leading through the staff corridor, ending abruptly. Letter from M.L., hinting at secret patronage. Candles unlighting, moved, then restored. He called Madame Lucille Vienne from her office. The elegant proprietor, still clad in mourning black but with renewed resolve in her pale eyes, joined him by the sculpture. Poirot produced Imogen's letter, unfolded and held between two fingertips. Madam, he said softly, who is M.L.? The benefactor so important that your artist would keep her identity secret even from her closest friends. Madame Vienne's breath caught. She closed her eyes briefly, as though gathering courage. I admit, she said, voice very low, that I suspected the initials pointed to my own late husband, Marcel Lefebvre. He was an art patron in Paris before his untimely death. But surely Imogen would not think him. No, it cannot be. Poirot's keen gaze did not waver. Perhaps Miss Thorne sought to honor his memory, or suspected he financed her work from beyond the grave. Vienne shook her head. She never spoke of him after the first month. And I find it impossible that she would believe ghostly assistance. Poirot tapped his lip. It remains a paradox. Yet paradoxes do not solve themselves. He turned back to the sculpture's empty pedestal. Tell me, madam, were there any disturbances here yesterday, noises, shadows, whispers, that you did not think to mention before? Madame Vienne frowned. Only one thing, I thought I heard laughter behind this screen. She indicated a tall folding partition near the staff door. A light, mocking laugh, then nothing. I assumed I imagined it. Mon Dieu, Poirot muttered. He motioned to an attendant. Bring the screens here. And fetch me one of those portrait stands. With swift efficiency, Poirot reconstructed the layout of the back gallery near the staff entrance. He measured with an imaginary tape, mapping sightlines and distances. As the screens were shifted, he examined their seams, their hinges, and the small gaps at floor level. Then he moved a portrait stand and crouched to inspect the skirting board. There, almost invisible in the morning light, was a faint scratch, like a nail dragged sideways. The back room, Poirot murmured. Someone searched for a hidden passage, or attempted to. A careless pivot of a screen would gouge the wood. He stood and addressed Madame Vienne and Rawlinson, who had rejoined them. Between the staff quarters and this gallery lies a narrow service corridor. No secret tunnel, but an opportunity for concealment. Poirot traced the path with a slender finger. The muddy prints passed beneath this screen, and footsteps halted here. Someone peered behind too. He tapped the exposed wall, to survey the scene. Then fled. Rawlinson bristled. But the staff door was locked from the inside. Precisely, Poirot agreed. Which means the intruder used a key, or had an accomplice. And that suggests intimate knowledge of the gallery's operations. He turned to Madame Vienne. Your manager, M. Rawlinson, would possess keys. So would your senior staff, those you trust above all. Madame Vienne's hand flew to her heart. My head of exhibitions, no, no. Poirot raised a gloved hand to forestall her protest. I make no accusation. I observe possibilities. We must consider all whose routines might grant them free movement. He stepped back, surveying each face with that incisive gaze. Each bore a different mask, Crispin's tense regret, Caldwell's stoic concern, Rawlinson's anxious composure, and Vienne's anguished uncertainty. In that charged silence, Poirot prepared to deepen his inquiries, to inspect walls, question alibis, and probe the human heart. For beneath every polite smile, every cultivated posture, lay a hidden motive, jealousy, fear, jealousy, devotion, woven into the tapestry of this gallery's fate. And Poirot, methodical to the marrow, would unravel each thread in turn, until the vanished artist and her crimson fox re-emerged into the light of truth. Chapter 3, The First Clue, The First Façade. Late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of the Vienne Gallery's private salon, where Poirot had arranged 3 chairs in a neat semicircle. On a small side table lay the items he had gathered so far, a single leather glove, the torn scrap of crimson silk, a slip of paper bearing the initials, M.L., and, now, a solitary matchstick with a charred head. Across from him sat Edward Crispin, Professor Harriet Caldwell, and Felix Rawlinson, each flanked by a silent attendant. Poirot cleared his throat, his waxed moustaches rising in anticipation. Miss Amis, it is time for questions of the utmost importance. Let us begin with Monsieur Crispin. Crispin, his hands clenched in his lap, nodded briskly. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Yesterday afternoon, Poirot began, you stated that you were sketching in the front room. Yet none of your sketches bear your signature, or indeed, any artist's signature. How do you explain that? Crispin's dark eyes darted to the floor. I left my portfolio in my flat, sir. I was so eager to arrive here that I forgot it entirely. Poirot gave a measured nod. A plausible oversight, yet curious. When one forgets one's tools of trade, one seldom forgets the imprints one leaves. Have you ever taken the liberty of sketching in public without caring for attribution? I would never do such a thing, Crispin protested. I value my reputation too highly. Poirot tapped the matchstick thoughtfully. Ah yes, the matchstick. This was found in the hearth of the salon. Monsieur Rawlinson, you admitted to burning old invoices. Yet this brand of match is of a type supplied only to the gallery's reception. He looked pointedly at the manager. How came this match here, if not for purposes beyond mere bookkeeping? Rawlinson swallowed. His posture stiffened. I keep a box here, Monsieur Poirot, for quick lighting of the gallery's candles. It is most convenient. Indeed, Poirot murmured. But these matches are marked with the legend of Vienne Gallery, Paris, and are never removed from stock except by the head attendant. One would hardly burn mere paper with so fine a match, non? Tell me, Monsieur Rawlinson, what is your relationship with the head attendant? Rawlinson frowned. He is a loyal fellow. Nothing else. I admit, I took one match to verify the depth of the hearth. I intended no deception. Poirot's little grey cells churned. He placed the matchstick between the fingertips of his right hand, letting Rawlinson squirm under its silent accusation. Verifying the hearth? Curious, since there is no evidence of fire aside from the soot on this glove. He lifted the glove from its case, turning it inside out to reveal a faint smear of black along the palm. The artist's glove, yes? Yet more sooty than even the fireplace would produce. It was worn while handling something that burns more fiercely than wood. Crispin and Caldwell exchanged nervous glances. Rawlinson's face had turned ashen. The manager's voice was small when he answered. Perhaps you wish to ask about the rosewood sculpture. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. The firebird was removed last night, replaced by a rose petal, no, a single petal of deep red. A rather theatrical touch. Whose habit is it to leave roses around the gallery? Madame Vienne had preferred fresh blooms in each room. Violet-scented stocks and white lilies were her usual selection. Red roses appeared only when she celebrated a milestone. I gave Madame Vienne a dozen crimson roses yesterday, Rawlinson admitted, voice trembling. She intended them for the private sitting room. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did Madame Vienne share those roses with anyone? Rawlinson hesitated. I offered one to Professor Caldwell as I passed. It was a mere courtesy. Professor Caldwell's cool expression cracked for a moment. I declined. I seldom accept flowers. They distract from one's work. But you smelled of rose this morning, Poirot observed. Caldwell sniffed her sleeve, caught off guard. Orange blossom, she said, combined with rose. I spray that perfume nightly. Exactly, Poirot said gently. Yet this rose was fresh, laid beneath the firebird. Its fragrance lingered in the air. He ran a fingertip along the table's edge, picking up the scrap of silk. And this fragment, torn from an evening gown, Madame Vienne's own. Found behind Imogen's easel in the staff room. It shows a tear at the seam, as if the wearer were pushed aside. Crispin gasped softly. But Madame Vienne, could she have harmed Imogen? What of motive? Poirot asked, voice low. Madame Vienne stands to gain in the eyes of critics, if Imogen's fabulously priced painting is revealed separately at a higher sum. She might choose to suppress the first showing in order to raise the stakes. The two gentlemen and the professor stared at him. Rawlinson's eyes, however, fixed on the matchstick. He stammered, but I saw no tear in her gown when I left. I mean, when I delivered the roses. Poirot set down the silk. Possibly you did not look. Yet here it lies, a clue, Monsieur Rawlinson, that you had reason to bar Imogen's progress. But you say nothing of the initials ML on the letter. He unfolded the scrap of paper for all to see. ML, the mysterious patron. Madame Vienne suggested it might be Marcel Lefebvre, her deceased husband. Professor Caldwell suspected someone more nefarious. Monsieur Crispin, what of you? Does this ring any bell? Crispin shook his head, but his eyes were distant. I cannot imagine. No one of importance has initials ML that I know. Yet Imogen trusted this person implicitly, Poirot said. She mentioned these letters in her final note, hinting at a revelation she planned to share tonight. A revelation she never delivered. Caldwell placed a careful hand over the letter. We must consider that someone fearsome might have demanded ownership of the painting. If Imogen refused, they might resort to force. Exactly, said Poirot. Which brings me to the muddy footprints. They begin here, he indicated a spot beneath the window, and proceed in a straight line to the staff door. They are boot prints, size 8, rubber-soled. But midway, they falter. 5 distinct prints, and then nothing. He rose and crossed to the window, examining the sill. See how the paint has been chipped away? Someone climbed through here, once. But the prints inside are half-formed, as though the intruder staggered. Poirot tapped his cane against the floor. Staggered, or perhaps carried something heavy. Back at the chairs, he summarized, we have 3 accounts, Monsieur Crispin's forgotten sketches, Professor Caldwell's secret commission, and Monsieur Rawlinson's unauthorized fire. Each lies in some measure. Each conceals more than it reveals. He turned to Madame Vienne, who had entered quietly and stood by the doorway. Madame, we must search the staff quarters. If Imogen was held there, her canvas might yet be hidden. Vienne's lips trembled. Of course. She motioned to the attendants, and Poirot followed her toward the corridor. Before they left, he paused, pencil in hand. One more thing, he said, casting a glance back at his 3 suspects. No one admitted to hearing Imogen's voice at the moment she vanished. And yet someone must have constrained her. Listen carefully, who can account for the few seconds of silence between the 5th and 6th minute to 6 o'clock? The question hung in the hush. Rawlinson swallowed convulsively. Caldwell wrung her hands. Crispin's chin quivered. Poirot smiled thinly. We shall see, he said. Soon, one of you will betray the façade that seals this mystery. And with that, he followed Madame Vienne down the corridor, leaving behind the salon that held the first clue, and the first façade, of a most intricate puzzle. Chapter 4, A Hidden Compartment. Late morning found Hercule Poirot once more within the hushed galleries of Madame Vienne's establishment. A gentle London drizzle tapped at the windows, and the heavy scent of rain-damp pavement drifted in on a thin breeze. Poirot, in his perfectly pressed frock coat, stood before Imogen Thorne's empty easel in the rear room, his little grey cells humming with anticipation. Across the gallery, Madame Lucille Vienne hovered anxiously, wringing a lace handkerchief. Mon ami, she said, voice taut, the police have searched every room, every closet, every secret panel they could find. There is nothing but silence and empty racks. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Patience, madam. There is more to these walls than meets the eye. He tapped his cane twice against the wooden floor, drawing attention to a subtle distortion in the newly polished skirting board beneath the easel. Observe, a line of slightly uneven varnish, and here, a minuscule gap. With a delicate movement, Poirot pressed the panel. It yielded with a barely audible click, sliding inward to reveal a shallow recess. Madame Vienne gasped. Within lay a small, locked wooden box, its surface carved with an intricate pattern of foxes and vines. Impossible, she whispered. How could I not have known of this? Poirot smiled serenely. Often, the most ingenious hideaways elude even the keenest eye. He produced from his waistcoat pocket a slender pick, acquired long ago from a Parisian locksmith. In 3 deft twists, the box's tumbler released. The lid creaked as it opened. Inside lay 2 items, a scrap of crimson silk, no larger than the palm of one's hand, and a folded scrap of paper, bearing the initials, M.L., in angular script. Poirot removed them reverently and placed them upon the table behind him, where a small lamp cast a warm glow. Madame Vienne sank into a chair, her face ashen. That silk, she murmured. It matches the hem of my gala gown. But, and I cannot believe it, why would Imogen have torn a piece from my dress? Poirot lifted the silk, turning it over between white-gloved fingertips. Note the irregular tear, madam. Not a scissors cut, but a jagged split, as though torn in haste, perhaps during a struggle. He held it up to the light, revealing a faint smudge of something darker than the red dye. And see here, a spot of soil, identical in hue to that on Imogen's glove. Our artist carried more than paint when she vanished. Madame Vienne stared at her empty hands. No? Impossible. She rose unsteadily. I must have misplaced this box. But why would Imogen hide these things here, unless she feared detection? Ah, fear, said Poirot softly. Fear is the beginning of method. Our Imogen suspected someone, perhaps the mysterious M.L., and prepared for an encounter. He unfolded the paper scrap. The initials were the only marking, the remainder of the paper had been torn away. Poirot laid the silk atop the letter and closed the box with a snap. These were concealed before the unveiling. Yet when the frame was lifted, the compartment remained hidden. Someone knew of it, and perhaps removed the painting but overlooked these tokens. Madame Vienne's eyes brimmed with tears. You mean, someone was here, behind my back? Precisely, Poirot replied. Now, let us consider our suspects. Who besides you had motive to frighten Imogen, or worse, to steal her masterpiece? Madame Vienne bit her lip. Edward Crispin, he envied her. Professor Caldwell, her guardian angel yet demanding. And Felix Rawlinson, ever anxious to please. Each worthy of suspicion. Poirot placed the silk into an envelope. We shall examine them further. But first, I wish to retrace the route from this room to the servants' quarters, where those muddy prints led. He motioned to the corridor. Come, madam. We shall step through as Imogen did, or as her abductors did, and note every obstacle, every creak. They threaded through the narrow passage, past locked doors and silent offices, until they stood before the servants' door. Poirot knelt, inspecting the lock for marks of tampering. It was secured from within, he observed. Yet the prints ceased here. The intruder must have escaped through another door, one less obvious. He rose, scanning the high ceiling. A service window above, perhaps. A man, or woman, small enough to clamber through, required only a ladder or a stool. He pointed to a faint paint scuff on the sill. Here, the same chipped paint as before. Someone climbed down on the outside, carrying something of value. What of this letter? Madame Vienne asked, holding out the folded scrap. Who is M.L.? Poirot pocketed the note. A ghostly patron. Yet ghosts seldom pay in cash. I suspect that M.L. stands for someone real, one of our circle, or someone they serve. He tapped his temple. We shall see which name emerges when I interrogate each suspect anew. Back in the main gallery, Poirot paused before the empty central frame. He traced the outline with a gloved fingertip. "This void speaks to me," he murmured. Imogen withheld 2 tokens here, 1, the fear in her heart, and 2, the key to her escape or her undoing. We must find her before another token is hidden or destroyed. Meanwhile, upstairs in her private office, Madame Vienne remembered the day Imogen had confided in her about ML over tea. The painter had brushed a lock of hair back from her forehead and whispered, "He says he admires my work, madam, and he offers support beyond measure." Vienne had nodded politely, but her heart had tightened in jealousy. Standing now before Poirot, she said, "Monsieur, I recall that he signed letters as ML. Only once did I suggest it might be my late husband, Marcel Lefebvre, but Imogen laughed, said it was too romantic to think her patron a ghost." She paused. She believed ML to be a living man, with living money. Poirot's moustaches flicked upward. A man with both the means and the motive to intervene at the highest level. Could it be Professor Caldwell's publisher? Or Crispin's wealthy uncle? Or Felix Rawlinson himself, for whom this gallery's success is life itself? Vienne shivered. Each theory more dreadful than the last. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Dread, however, can be a compass. Fear drives people to hide, or to harm. You said, madam, that you intended to locate Imogen in the servants' quarters, but that door led only to a dead end. Yet here was a hidden box, placed deliberately where an artist might seek sanctuary. He tapped the back of the easel. Imogen's last act, perhaps, was to secret away evidence. We must recover the painting itself, but these clues tell us more. Imogen knew her trust would be betrayed. Madame Vienne swallowed. Then we must protect those who remain, and hope the artist is alive to tell her own tale. Poirot laid a reassuring hand on her arm. Courage, madam. The trail is growing clearer. We have footprints, a hidden box, a piece of your silk, and an elusive benefactor. Soon the veil will be lifted. As he turned to leave, the detective paused and cast one final glance at the empty frame. In that blank space, he saw both the promise of art and the peril of avarice. And in his mind, the game advanced to its next move, ready for the players to reveal their hands. Chapter 5, Midnight Intrusion. The Vienne Gallery lay in silence under the cloak of night. Rain pattered in soft, regular rhythms against the leaded windows, and the distant chime of Big Ben carried on the damp air. Inside, the vast exhibition halls and intimate salons were plunged in shadow, save for a handful of dimmed wall sconces that cast long, wavering silhouettes across gilt frames and marble pedestals. Madame Vienne had retired to her nearby flat, leaving the gallery under the careful guard of 2 attendants, and, unbeknownst to them, one decidedly less benign presence. Hercule Poirot lingered in the private salon, engrossed in the notes he had made earlier that day. The table before him bore the evidence collected so far, the torn scrap of crimson silk, the sooty leather glove, the charred matchstick, and the slip of paper emblazoned with the initials, ML. He arranged them neatly, pausing to inhale the faint blend of orange blossom and musk that still clung to the glove's interior. His little grey cells were at work, sorting each fragment of information into mental compartments. A soft click echoed through the room. Poirot's ears pricked. He looked up, serene composure giving way to alert intensity. The click was followed by the faintest scrape of wooden sole against polished oak. He rose, smoothing the lapels of his coat, and extinguished the small lamp on the table. Darkness enveloped him, broken only by the glow of the street lamps filtering through the curtained window. Footsteps drifted in from the corridor. Poirot moved silently toward the doorway, positioning himself behind a gilt screen. The sound grew clearer, someone descending the stairs from the upper galleries, their breathing measured. Poirot recognized the weight and cadence as not quite human, too deliberate, too self-controlled. Through the narrow gap between screen and wall, he spied a tall figure dressed in canvas overalls, the featureless silhouette of a workman's disguise. The intruder glided past the row of empty frames, crouched by the Firebird sculpture, and paused. The polished plinth bore an imprint of varnish that did not match the others, and the intruder knelt to examine the base. Poirot, his moustaches quivering with anticipation, sensed the culprit searching for something, perhaps a hidden mechanism. With a fluid motion, the masked figure withdrew a slender implement from a pocket and prized at the sculpture's mounting. The rosewood bird shifted on its pedestal. Poirot realized at once that this was the very statue stolen from the front hall hours earlier, raised again for reasons unknown. The intruder placed a gloved hand beneath its weight and lifted it down. As he did so, a crimson rose petal fluttered to the floor, landing before Poirot's feet. A plan formed in Poirot's mind. He waited until the intruder carried the sculpture through the archway leading to the back room, where Imogen's easel still stood, then slipped silently from his hiding place. The lone sconce cast his long shadow ahead of him as he followed the intruder into the gallery's deeper recesses. Here the hush was absolute, save for the muffled patter of rain through a skylight high above. The intruder set the sculpture atop a low table and turned toward a blank stretch of wall. In the dim light, Poirot saw him press against the plaster in 3 precise spots. A panel sprang open, revealing a square recess in which a rolled canvas lay wrapped in brown paper. The thief knelt and began to extract the parcel. Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur," he called in his calmest French accent, "you will kindly desist." The intruder froze, caught mid-movement, the bundle of canvas tipped precariously in his hand. The workman's costume peeled away as the man turned. It was Felix Rawlinson, the gallery manager, his face pale beneath a thin sheen of sweat. His eyes met Poirot's, wide with guilt. "Monsieur Poirot," he stammered. I thought I had secured the painting. You must understand." Poirot advanced, taking in every detail. "Motive, dear monsieur, is a delicate flower. It must be nourished by fear or desire or greed. Tell me, which nourished you?" Rawlinson swallowed. "It is not what you think. I discovered that Imogen planned to expose Madame Vienne's finances, to reveal that she had concealed losses. If the Crimson Fox sold at a private auction, Vienne's reputation, and this gallery, would be saved. I did it for her, for the gallery. To force the painting's sale." Poirot's eyebrows ascended. "So you abducted your artist, stowed her canvas here, and, conveniently, removed the sculpture to distract the police. And you left this rose petal as your calling card." Rawlinson's shoulders slumped. "The rose? I left it by habit. I delivered crimson roses to Madame Vienne today, and the petal slipped free." "Habit can become a clue," Poirot noted, stepping closer to examine the rosewood. "This sculpture was originally displayed in the front hall. You relocated it here, to conceal your true prize." He pulled the canvas parcel gently from Rawlinson's grasp. "Imogen's masterpiece. The moment we take this to the light, the mystery will shrink." Rawlinson's face crumpled. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought police would recover her safely, if I ensured the painting's value. I wanted the gallery to survive. And at what cost?" Poirot's voice was mild but firm. "Madame Vienne's trust. Imogen's freedom. Yourself." He tucked the rolled painting under his arm. "You will return the statue to its pedestal, monsieur, and remain here until Inspector Japp arrives." Rawlinson nodded, tears glimmering in his eyes. He returned the sculpture, the wood gleaming with urgency under the lamp's glow. Poirot then noticed a second rose petal, yellow this time, clutched between Rawlinson's trembling fingers. Yellow roses were Professor Caldwell's favorite. Rawlinson's lip quivered as he looked up. Poirot turned in surprise. "Monsieur Rawlinson, what is this?" Rawlinson stammered, It fell from my pocket. I carried 2 bouquets today, red for Madame Vienne, yellow for Professor Caldwell, whom I admire. The yellow must have accumulated here earlier." Poirot pocketed the petal alongside the red one. 2 bouquets petals, 2 separate attachments. "We shall examine this further." He guided Rawlinson back toward the main hall, leaving the sculpture restored and the painting secure in his arms. Exiting the back room, Poirot paused at the threshold of the private salon. He placed the petal in an envelope with the other evidence. Then he glanced at the empty frames, still covered in muslin. Madame Vienne insisted no one else touched these rooms, Poirot muttered to himself, yet 2 petals, 2 gloves, a hidden compartment, chaos of attachments. He tapped his cane gently. And all orchestrated under the nose of her devoted manager. He moved swiftly through the gallery, the echoes of his footsteps the only accompaniment. Outside, the rain had ceased. The hush of night lay heavy over the building, but within, a storm of revelations had broken. Poirot stepped into the street to summon Inspector Japp, canvas in hand, the stolen masterpiece now free at last. In that moment, poised between shadow and lamplight, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The midnight intrusion had yielded the statue, and a confession. Yet in the petals' colors and the manager's tears lay further tales to uncover. For in every crime, he knew, there lurked more than one culprit, the deed, the motive, and the hidden heart that whispered the final, fatal secret. Chapter 6, The Psychology of Motive. The next morning dawned cool and clear, a subtle promise of renewal hovering in the London air. In the Vienne Gallery's private salon, Hercule Poirot had prepared a tidy tableau of evidence on the polished rosewood table, the sooty glove, the torn silk, the matchstick, and the crimson and yellow rose petals, each nested in its own little envelope. He stood behind the table, hands clasped, surveying his small kingdom of clues with that habitual blend of solemnity and delight. Madame Vienne, still pale from yesterday's revelations, pressed a cup of Darjeeling into his hands as he took up his place. "Monsieur Poirot," she said in her hushed tones, "we are ready for whatever questions you must ask." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, madame. Today, we explore not only the facts, but the hearts behind them. For a crime is born of psychology as much as opportunity." He motioned to the single empty chair opposite him. "Our first guest, Professor Harriet Caldwell." The door opened, and the professor entered, her glasses catching the morning light. She paused at the threshold, offering a thin smile that betrayed both weariness and resolve, then Saturday. Poirot fixed her with a keen gaze. "Professor, yesterday you told me of Imogen's doubts concerning an anonymous commission. You said she trusted ML implicitly. Yet now we know she distrusted everyone around her. Pray, what of your own judgment? Did you ever question your pupil's choice of confidant?" Caldwell's fingers tightened around her teacup. "I urged caution. But Imogen had that artist's faith in others, the belief that beauty alone could bind hearts. I admit I did not probe deeply enough into ML." She looked away. "I regret that now." Poirot inclined his head. Regret is a powerful emotion. It can spur one to guilt, or to conceal one's own secrets. You declined Madame Vienne's crimson rose yet smelled of orange blossom and musk, perfume applied nightly, you assured me. Yet the crimson petal was laid at the firebird's feet. What motive could Mother Nature, or chemistry, have to sow confusion." He paused, then leaned in. "Tell me, Professor Caldwell, have you ever desired something that you could not credit to your own merit? Did you envy Imogen's meteoric success?" Caldwell's laugh was brittle. "Envy? Hardly. I was her mentor, her friend. My achievements are those of intellect, not acclaim. Imogen painted truths I could never capture in words." She set her cup down, her eyes glistening. "Yet I admit I felt a pang of longing when the world praised her, and overlooked me." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Longing can turn darker if unchecked. But you did nothing to harm her. You sought only to guide her. I believe your regret is genuine." He rose, crossing to the table to lift the matchstick and show it to Caldwell. "This matchstick, burned, but never entirely consumed, bears your nose prints. Did you handle it yesterday as part of your tea ritual? Or did you use it to guard one secret while revealing another?" Professor Caldwell's lips parted, then closed as though tasting a bitter truth. Yes, I lit a match when I examined the hearth, as did Monsieur Rawlinson. But I left immediately after. My only secret is that I feared for Imogen's safety." Poirot nodded once, his pen already jotting notes. "Fear, again. A motive that binds us all." He placed the matchstick back, then turned toward the portrait of Edward Crispin seated in the adjoining chair. Crispin entered, shoulders hunched, clutching a satchel. He swallowed before taking his seat. Poirot watched him for a moment before speaking. "Monsieur Crispin, you confessed envy, yet denied violence. You sketched in public to capture life's spontaneity. Yet none of your sketches appeared. I have since discovered you did not leave your portfolio in Bloomsbury. You left it here, in the gallery, in your satchel. Why hide your work?" Crispin's face flushed. He opened the satchel, withdrew 2 small charcoal drawings, and laid them before Poirot. Each depicted a fox in flight, one in crimson hues, the other robed in shadow. "I sketched these last night, monsieur. I was restless, I sketched the fox from memory, hoping to capture Imogen's spirit, even in her absence." Poirot studied the drawings. "Then you were here after the disappearance, unobserved. You had opportunity." He tapped the torn silk envelope. "This scrap came from Madame Vienne's gown, torn during a struggle. You visited Madame Vienne the day before the unveiling, to discuss your nephew's debut at the academy. You brushed past her, and the silk snagged. Yet you did not mention the tear until now. Why?" Edward's voice trembled. "I did not wish to implicate her. Madame Vienne has been so kind to me. I feared causing scandal." He lowered his head. "I have lied out of loyalty and fear." Poirot nodded, dispensing with no further words. He dismissed Crispin, then turned back to Madame Vienne, who had listened quietly from a side corner. "Madame," he said, reclaiming the torn silk and the glove, "each of our 3 suspects has shown fear, and each has lied. Yet only one harbored the dread that would prompt abduction, the dread that drove them to move the crimson fox, from art to abduction to ransom." He placed the glove atop the silk. Imogen's glove was burned not by wood fire, but by candle wax, darker heat, and harder to erase. Someone sought to destroy her evidence on the glove, evidence of her path, of her final struggle. Who among you would spare neither cloth nor cotton, but burn the artist's tools to secure your secret? Madame Vienne's breath caught. She pressed a trembling handkerchief to her lips. Poirot sensed her turmoil, that familiar stirring of guilt tempered by sincerity. "Could it be," he continued softly, "that you, madam, fearing the unveiling of both the painting and the gallery's troubles, sought to control events through measures both subtle and harsh?" He rose and stepped around the table, facing Vienne head-on. "You knew of the secret compartment, implanted by your late husband's design, to protect valued items. You placed Imogen's painting there, planning to retrieve it later. You confronted her in the back room, silk torn as you struggled. You sent the rose petals as signals, red for reward, yellow for caution, hoping to lure her compliance. But she refused, and fled through the window, leaving behind the glove." Madame Vienne's eyes filled. "No, no, Hercule. I never. I only wished to delay the unveiling until I could repair my finances. I never meant to frighten Imogen so." Poirot nodded, his gaze gentle yet unwavering. "But your fear taught you a dangerous lesson, that art, and money, can drive one to extremes." He picked up the letters from M.L., the initials neat in dark ink. "On this scrap, you inscribed my name when you wrote for my assistance. But on the intact letters you burned, the signature was different, another benefactor, one who promised more than money, one who promised influence." He tapped the charred match head. "This match burned those letters, and also the evidence. A neat trick, but not neat enough." Madame Vienne's hand flew to her chest. "I burned his letters. I burned them to protect Imogen from scandal. I thought if I stifled talk of other patrons, she would focus on her debut." Her voice broke. "I lost control, tried to control both fate and finances." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Madam, psychic wounds often bleed long before the body feels pain. Your actions stemmed from love, misguided, but love nonetheless. Yet in your efforts, you nearly destroyed both artist and art." He turned to the servant who had accompanied him. "Summon Inspector Japp. We have all the pieces." Then, to Madame Vienne, he added gently, "And we must find Imogen. For though we have unraveled motives and lies, the artist's safety remains our paramount concern." As he stood amid the gathered evidence, cloth, leather, wax, and petals, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. The game of hearts and motives is a delicate one. But in the end, the truth prevails, and justice, like art, finds its way into the light. And with that, Hercule Poirot prepared to gather the final threads, readying himself for the labyrinthine denouement that awaited in the labyrinth of lies he had so meticulously traversed. Chapter 7, The Labyrinth of Lies. The Vienne Gallery at dawn felt more like a crypt than an art house. Curtains were drawn against the pale light, and the heavy air was confused, redolent with rose perfume, still lingering ghosts of orange blossom, and the faint sting of smoke. Hercule Poirot moved with deliberate grace through the hushed rooms, retracing every path Imogen Thorne might have taken. Each photograph of a painting, each gilt frame, seemed to watch him, as if the artworks themselves expected their lost creator to reappear. Poirot paused before the empty central frame where the crimson fox had belonged. He laid out once more the evidence, the sooty glove, the scrap of crimson silk, the blackened matchstick, and 2 rose petals, one crimson, one yellow. For tokens, each telling a different story, yet together weaving a fabric of deception. He tapped the glove with a finger. "Here lies the first lie," he murmured. She wore this glove not only when fleeing, but when confronting her betrayer. A soft cough behind him announced the arrival of Inspector Japp, clutching his notebook. Poirot gestured to the table. "Good. Examine these once more. But first, let us visit the staff quarters, that is where the labyrinth begins." They descended a narrow staircase into the gallery's back corridors. Poirot's keen eyes noted variations in the wood grain under his cane, newer boards amid older, fresh nail holes next to ancient ones. Evidence of change, he observed. Someone altered this place to conceal movement. Perhaps a secret door once opened here, but no more. At the servant's door, Poirot knelt to examine the lock. "See here, the scratch marks run inward, not out." Whoever turned the key did so from the inside, then relocked behind them. They did not escape, they waited. Japp frowned. "But why lock themselves in?" To allay suspicion, Poirot replied. "To create an alibi of absence." He rose and pressed his palm against the door. "Now, another manipulation. Last night, someone repositioned this door frame ever so slightly. See how the light falls unevenly along the edge?" Japp frowned harder. "Who would bother?" "Someone who wished to hide a door behind the door. A haunted cabinet trick." Poirot stepped back, produced a small metal probe, and ran it along the jamb. A faint click followed. The panel beside the door swung inward, revealing a cramped closet space, empty save for a dusty coat rack and 2 leather boots. "Ah!" Poirot exclaimed softly. A hiding place, once used to conceal small objects, or a small person. He opened the boots. They were size 10, with rubber soles matching the muddy prints. Someone donned these, abandoned their own footwear, and emerged in another guise. Japp looked astonished. "You mean the intruder switched shoes here?" "Exactly," said Poirot. He slipped on one boot and hopped once, nodding appreciatively at its fit. Comfortable and waterproof, ideal for evening recesses. He removed it and placed it on the table with the other evidence. Made by a bespoke London cobbler. Not common. Sold only to a handful of clients. Back upstairs, Poirot assembled the trio, Edward Crispin, Professor Caldwell, and Madame Vienne, in the main salon. Their faces were drawn with fatigue and dread. Poirot stood before them, nodding to Japp, who distributed small copies of a gallery ledger showing purchases of bespoke boots. "Notice," Poirot began, "that only 2 names appear as purchasers of these boots in the past month, our Mr. Crispin, for his own use, and one other, a purchase under ML. He watched their reactions carefully. Madame Vienne's lip quivered, Crispin's eyes flicked to Caldwell. Crispin stammered, I ordered mine weeks ago, unaware of any other order." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. The order was placed under the guise of your own initials, EC, but the bill was paid by ML, no trace of any other buyer." Professor Caldwell leaned forward. "ML again. But those are Imogen's letters." "Precisely," said Poirot. "Our benefactor doubled as our boot buyer." He turned to Madame Vienne. "Madame, did you not mention that your late husband, Marcel Lefebvre, commissioned bespoke footwear in Paris? Yet these boots bear a London maker's mark. Why the change?" Vienne's throat bobbed. "My husband is long gone. I would not presume to use his name in a business transaction." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "But you use his initials on letters to Imogen. You paid for her shoes, left them for her, so she might pass unseen. A silent hand guiding her steps." Madame Vienne's eyes filled with tears. "I did it to help her escape scrutiny. To ensure she could move freely between here and Professor Caldwell's flat." Poirot turned to Crispin. "And you, whose sketches of the fox in flight were hidden in your satchel, why would you cover Imogen's tracks with your art?" Crispin's shoulders slumped. I thought to aid her. She confided in me that she planned to depart secretly tonight, rendezvous with ML, and begin her career abroad. I sketched to remember her brilliance, not to frame her." Professor Caldwell, meanwhile, looked pale. Poirot addressed her quietly. "And you, Professor, whose matchstick was found in the salon, you sought to burn not invoices but letters. Letters from ML demanding that Imogen end the gallery showing and accompany him instead. You feared she would elope, and you burned his threats. Caldwell's lips moved soundlessly. She clasped her hands. He wrote me, too. He promised to elevate my career if I persuaded Imogen. When she refused, I burned the letters to protect her. Poirot nodded gravely. A web of deceit, each thread cast with benevolent intent, yet each a lie. A labyrinth from which there is no single exit. He stepped back, folding his arms. But only one of you today donned those boots and left a woman's glove, silk tear, and rose petal along the route. Only one walked the corridor in canvas overalls, lifted the Firebird statue, and staged a midnight diversion. He raised a finger. Monsieur Crispin, your satchel of sketches placed you in the gallery at odd hours, but you never wore these boots. Professor Caldwell, your prints are on the matchstick, but not on the glove. Madame Vienne, your tears are real, but not your footwear. He turned to Jap. Inspector, may I have the gallery's payroll records for last month? Jap produced another ledger, this one listing staff wages. Poirot ran his finger down the names. Look here, the head attendant, one Samuel Mortimer, was absent for several days without explanation. He is recorded as paid, and yet missing. He ordered no boots. He paid no bills. But he was closest to the staff quarters. Jap's eyes widened. Mortimer. I recall our men questioned him. He feigned a stomach complaint. Poirot tapped the ledger. And what of the boots? He would fit in size 10, rubber sole. He had motive, fear of losing his position when Imogen threatened to expose the gallery's finances. He had opportunity, free access to every corridor. He had cunning, he impersonated a workman, donned gloves and overalls to divert our attention. Crispin gasped. We never even thought of him. Caldwell covered her mouth. Vienne shook her head. Inspector, Poirot said, turning, arrest Samuel Mortimer at once. He is the living labyrinth's keeper, and the one who led Imogen here only to lock her in the hidden closet above the staff room. He moved the sculpture to stall us, he scattered the petals to confuse us, and he burned the threatening letters to conceal his own guilt. Jap seized his notebook. Right you are, Poirot. I'll have him in irons. Poirot stood amidst the assembled suspects, whose relief and astonishment mingled in the dim light. He picked up the red rose petal and held it aloft. Let this petal be a symbol, he said softly, of paths that lead nowhere, and of secrets that cannot hide forever. And so, with the labyrinth of lies exposed, only one thread remained to follow, the whereabouts of Imogen Thorne herself. Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The final denouement was within reach, and with it, the return of both artist and her lost masterpiece. His little grey cells leaned forward, eager for the last move. Chapter 8, The Unmasking and the Masterpiece Restored. Late that afternoon, all concerned gathered once more in the Vienne Gallery's grand salon. The skylight overhead was freed of rain-streaked grime, and pale shafts of sunlight illumined the gilt frames and marble busts. Madame Lucille Vienne, still trembling from the morning's revelations, sat to one side. Professor Caldwell and Edward Crispin remained nearby, their relief tinged with residual anxiety. Inspector Jap stood in an authoritative pose by the fireplace, ready to receive Poirot's final account. And in the center, Hercule Poirot himself, mustache waxed to perfection, attire immaculate, prepared to draw the curtain on this most perplexing affair. Miss Amis, Poirot began, his voice measured and calm, we are assembled to unveil not only the culprit behind Imogen Thorne's disappearance, but also the fate of the Crimson Fox. Allow me to recount the sequence of events, linking each clue to its origin, until the tapestry of deceit lies bare. He held aloft the sooty glove. This glove was found at the foot of the Firebird sculpture during last evening's confusion. It bore traces of candle wax mixed with paint solvent, proof that it was removed in haste after a struggle conducted beneath artificial light. We discovered that the lighting rig in the back gallery was modified deliberately to conceal the intruder's actions. The very person responsible for that tampering was Samuel Mortimer, the head attendant. Poirot paused for Inspector Japp's agreement. The inspector inclined his head. Poirot continued, producing the torn scrap of crimson silk. This fragment, shredded raggedly from Madame Vienne's evening gown, was found hidden in a secret compartment behind Imogen's easel. It attests to her final struggle with the very person entrusted to care for her safety. Mortimer expected no resistance, believing Imogen would comply when summoned to his clandestine meeting. Madame Vienne gasped, "But why? Why would he do this?" "Fear," Poirot replied gently. Fear of dismissal when Imogen threatened to reveal irregularities in the gallery's accounts, irregularities which Mortimer had concealed for his own gain. He misappropriated gallery funds, and Imogen had discovered discrepancies in sales reports. When she pressed Madame Vienne for an explanation, Mortimer panicked. Poirot laid the silk aside and fetched the charred matchstick. This was used to burn letters from M.L., alleged patronage notes that Imogen carried as evidence. Mortimer sought to destroy those letters, believing they linked him to forged invoices. He used the match from the gallery's exclusive stock to hide his fingerprints, assuming no one would suspect a servant of having access. All eyes shifted to Felix Rawlinson, who stood apart, relief and lingering guilt etched on his face. "Monsieur Poirot," he interjected, "I confess I too bore witness to these events. In my misguided devotion to Madame Vienne, I tried to safeguard the gallery's reputation, but I was never the abductor." Poirot inclined his head courteously. "Your involvement was a red herring, born of love for your employer rather than criminal intent. You moved the Crimson Fox to the hidden closet, believing it's safer there, and you staged the midnight intrusion to distract suspicion from Imogen's true plight. Yet you left the rose petals, crimson and yellow, from the bouquets you delivered, evidence of your anxiety, but not your guilt." He faced Edward Crispin. "You sketched Imogen's fox in flight under moonlit skies, hoping to preserve her brilliance in art, yet inadvertently placed yourself in the gallery after hours. Your charcoal drawings misled us to believe you had been present at the moment of disappearance. But you, Monsieur Crispin, acted only out of friendship. Aware of Mortimer's plan, you strove to aid Imogen's escape, secretly meeting her to offer passage to Paris." Crispin bowed his head. "Yes, monsieur. I admit I feared for her safety, and I drew those sketches to guide her path." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Honorable, yet mistaken, sir. The true abductor did not meet Imogen in the main halls, but forced her through a service door to the narrow corridor below. There he confined her in the concealed closet, planning to extract a ransom from Madame Vienne. Mortimer believed her family's wealth would oblige her to pay." At this point, Inspector Japp stepped forward. "I can confirm," he said, "that Samuel Mortimer has confessed under questioning. He admitted to both the theft of the painting and the abduction of Miss Thorne. He awaits transport to Bow Street this very evening." Poirot crossed to the locked easel and produced 2 keys, one from his own coat pocket, the other freshly delivered by Japp's constable. With a smooth motion, he unlocked the secret panel and withdrew a rolled canvas still swathed in brown paper. As he unfurled it, the Crimson Fox emerged, an arresting depiction of a fox in mid-leap, its vivid russet coat aflame against a moon-drenched forest. A murmur of admiration rippled through the assembled guests. Madame Vienne's eyes glistened with tears. Professor Caldwell exhaled in wonder. Even the stern Inspector Japp let his gaze linger on the brushwork and bold composition. Poirot held the painting reverently. "Behold, the masterpiece restored, not only to its rightful place, but to its creator's arms. At that moment, the double doors opened and a tall, slender figure stepped forward. Imogen Thorne, dust-kissed and shaken but very much alive, her vivid auburn hair tousled and her cheeks flushed with relief, offered a grateful smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "you have saved both my art and myself." Poirot bowed. "Madam, your courage in concealing the letters and seeking justice was commendable. It was your fleeing through the window, leaving that glove behind, which provided the initial clue. Your strength guided us to the truth." Imogen approached the painting and ran her fingertips along the fox's tail. "This work, it was meant to symbolize freedom. I never dreamed I would need freedom in quite so literal a sense." Madame Vienne stepped forward and embraced her protégé. "I am so grateful to you, Hercule. Without you, I do not know what fate would have befallen her or this gallery." Poirot smiled, modest yet pleased. "The credit belongs to reason, observation, and the little grey cells. Yet it is the human heart, bonded by loyalty, fear, and compassion, that writes the final chapter." He straightened and addressed everyone. "Let the crimson fox take its place once more on the wall, a testament to art's power and to the perils that attend its creation. May it stand as a reminder that mysteries, no matter how intricate, ultimately yield to patience and method. And may we all remember that truth, like beauty, demands pursuit until found." With a flourish, Poirot placed the canvas back in its frame and secured it in place. As the gallery staff prepared to draw back the muslin cloths and reveal the restored exhibition, a hush fell. Then, one by one, the coverings were lifted, each painting restored to view, the firebird sculpture returned to its pedestal, and finally the crimson fox displayed center stage, its tale of flight complete. In the soft glow of gaslight, amidst murmurs of admiration and renewed confidence in the gallery's future, Hercule Poirot allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The puzzle was solved, the lost artist safe, and the masterpiece reclaiming its rightful place. All in a day's work for the world's greatest detective, whose methodical genius and unerring psychology had, once again, triumphed over deceit.